I'm so excited for our Lunch and Learn today. We are here with a very special guest. His name is Gary Noesner. He was the head, he's the author of Stalling for Time, My Life as an FBI Hostage Negotiator. Gary is the former chief of the FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit. Gary, I first learned about you from watching the TV show Waco on Netflix, just about the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, and how you handled everything that had gone on there. And I think it's awesome that you got back to me and we're open to having this interview. I'm really excited to learn your thoughts on FBI hostage negotiation and how it pertains to business relationships and being better leaders and being better professionals in the working world. So Gary, thanks for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I look forward to the conversation.
So Gary, I'll jump right in because we're here to talk about mentorship. We're also here to talk about your experience as an FBI hostage negotiator. Now, one thing I know, one of your biggest keys is listening, understanding, and then reacting. I know one of the biggest things you kind of fought against in your work, especially in your book, was this idea of, okay, we got a little bit of information, let's go in and attack them. Let's go in and put in tear gas, or let's go in and come in with machine guns or ammo. What I think this applies a lot to business. I think oftentimes, and by the way, I know I'm guilty of it too, is I'll hear the first couple words that somebody says, and then immediately once I hear that, I'm already formulating a thought about what I'm going to respond without actually fully listening to what they have to say. How can we fight against that? How can we consciously be aware that we do this? How can we fight against that? What are some of the things that you observed as an FBI hostage negotiator?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about listening, it's an active endeavor. I mean, listening is not merely, I wait till you're finished talking and so I'm ready to say what I've been wanting to say. My responses should really be triggered based on what I'm hearing from you. And I think in the business community, the personal relationship community, any way you want to look at it, people want to work with people that they like and respect and feel respect them and are genuine, truthful, all those sorts of things. And we best do that by demonstrating, not just merely saying it. We understand how somebody feels about something that's happened or what we're discussing, not only the substance, but the emotions that are wrapped around it. And when we describe that, we paraphrase it, we summarize it, we talk about the emotionality we hear in the other person's voice or their comments. When we do those things, it's a very powerful tool towards creating a relationship of trust. And I would submit, Garrett, that everything in life is about a relationship. Everything. Whether you're talking about sales, negotiations on a business deal, if you don't have the relationship, it's generally not going to work out in a satisfactory manner. There has to be a level of trust and understanding. Even the business guru Stephen Covey says, first seek to understand and then to be understood. So don't be in a rush to deliver upon the other party what your thoughts are, your ideas, your interpretations. Rather, make sure you understand what they're saying. And when you ask open-ended questions, it gives you more information. When you articulate what you think you've heard, if you get it wrong slightly, you'll probably get credit for making the attempt. But even if you get it wrong, you end up getting corrective information, which provides you the data you need anyway. So that's the underlying premise. You talked about the battles we had in law enforcement and still do in some areas about gathering a minimal amount of information and using it to, employ our force option. Negotiations really evolved because it was primarily intended to keep police officers from going into dangerous situations where they would be harmed, potentially killed, or have to kill somebody else, or we'd lose a hostage. And we learned that this de-escalating, lowering the conflict, taking time to listen to what was being expressed by the other person were the keys towards gaining their cooperation to surrender peacefully. And, in law enforcement, we talk a good game about we use no more force than is absolutely necessary, but we're human beings in the business and we get frustrated. We want to say, well, Garrett, I talked to you real nice and do what I told you to, so now I'm going to make you do it. We have an inclination to want to do that. When in reality, we know that if we're patient and we're confident, we're more likely to get success. And the one last point to to mull over that is of power. And that is, the harder you push, the more aggressive you are, the more likely it is that you will be met with that same response in kind. So it becomes self-defeating.
That's really fascinating. So I think there's a lot of really great points you just made there. So one, I love that you talked about the emotionality within the tone that you use when you speak with people, when you're seeking to understand what they're saying. The other thing that I love that you just mentioned was this idea that whatever kind of power or aggression I'm coming at you with, you're more likely than not going to reciprocate that. And so that is, sometimes we think, I think the general assumption is that, oh, if I come in with more power, you're just going to submit. You're going to just roll over and be cool with it if I come at you with enough aggression. But most people aren't that way. I think the only person I can think of, and I only know this because I just finished reading the book Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, the guy that started Pixar, but he talked about Steve Jobs, and only would Steve Jobs submit to somebody else's idea if they came at him hard enough. Like if somebody turned around and said, Steve, that's a really stupid idea, and here's why we shouldn't be doing that, he'd be like, okay, we'll do it your way. No, that makes sense. But he just, his logic was, if someone was passionate enough to like step to him and like come with them with enough aggression, that clearly he must be wrong and they must know something that he doesn't know. But most people are not that emotionally aware, I would say.
Well, it also may be a fine line between a confrontative style that he favored versus a candor. You know, he wanted people to tell him not just what he thought. And I think any good leader does it. May not necessarily in the style that Steve Jobs might have embraced. But nonetheless, you know, if you're a good, effective leader, you want to create an atmosphere in which subordinates, team members, coworkers, whatever, feel comfortable enough to express a reservation about an idea or present an alternative approach to solving a problem. If you don't foster that kind of creativity, then you're just a team of one person. You're not really leveraging the talents, skills, and abilities and experiences of your team. So, you know, that's what we tried to do. People, when they think of what I used to do in hostage negotiations, television always reflects it as being a person working by themselves. In reality, it's a team, 3, 4, 5, depends on how big the situation. But between those contacts with the person we're negotiating with, the team does a lot of brainstorming. You know, what did you think? What did you hear? Do you have any ideas? What do you think is important to this guy? Who might we contact to get more information about him? If you don't leverage the skill and talent and experience of your larger team, you're missing out on a great opportunity to maximize your resources. So I think it's the same thing in the business community, essentially. I mean, if there's a leader who's so overpowering and strong that people in the team are just going to say, I'm keeping my mouth shut, I'm going to wait to see what Garrett's going to do, and he's the boss, and if this is what he says, then I'm all for it. Well, you know, you don't want that. You know, you want somebody to say, boss, I think you're about to make a big mistake. I want to know that. So yeah, absolutely. You've got to be open to other ideas and thoughts. But, you know, I think in America particularly, not just America, but in advanced societies where there's a lot of pressure on people to make sales and do business, we are in a rush to get to the end game. You know, I'm in a rush to close the deal, make the deal, get the sale, you know, open the champagne, whatever. When in reality, we have to devote a lot of time. But it's the old saying, it's not the destination, it's the journey. You know, we have to devote some time into how do we get there? How do we create this relationship that is sustaining? You know, when I left the FBI, I was a consultant for 5 years, and I had a lot of client relationship interactions, and I never lost a client. And the reason was, I think the client knew we had a relationship, that there would be problems with what my company was doing and what they wanted. But they knew they'd pick up the phone and I would solve that problem. I would not rest until it was adequately addressed and, you know, and fixed. And I think that's the kind of confidence you want to have. We used to have a saying in the business, you want to be a farmer, not a hunter. You know, a hunter is always going out and looking for that new client, which is great. Every business has to do that. But your real sustaining business is farming those trusted client relationships that you've worked perhaps a long period of time to develop. Don't take them for granted. Nurture those, because they're the ones that are going to bring you back time and time again, sustaining business. And that's all relationship building. You know, I mean, and there were times the company I worked for was almost always the most expensive. But and if a decision was being forced on the people I worked with by budgetary people, well, we can get the same service from somebody else at a cheaper price. They would say, yeah, but they don't have Gary. I want Gary. I got a relationship. I'm not talking about me personally, but I mean, I have this relationship with this person that to me is worth spending a little bit more money because they're reliable, trustworthy. I know they're not cheating us. He's giving me a fair price. Boy, when you've hit that plateau, I mean, that's the whole deal.
That's great. That makes a lot of sense. And that's that whole point that you're someone that's going to listen to someone, that you're going to understand them before reacting. With that said, what are the consequences? I think sometimes, as you had even mentioned, that sometimes as a business leader, we might think that we're too busy to fully listen to everything going on from what our people are saying. In reality, you've identified that that's not the case. But what are the consequences if we're not able to actively listen to what our people are telling us, or to listen to the full thing of what's going on?
Yeah, they're going to think it's a waste of time. I manage people in the FBI, and I'm not going to say my leadership was perfect. There were times, I mean, inevitably it happened, where somebody wants a big chunk of your time and you just don't have any. I mean, you just, really busy doing a number of things, and they always come in at the most awkward and inconvenient time. You really have to discipline yourself to say, as painful as this is, and as late as this may make me stay at work, I'm going to put my phones on hold, close the office door, move out from behind my desk, and sit down with Garrett and listen to what Garrett has to say. And 9 out of 10 times, I don't have to solve the problem that Garrett brings, but I have to demonstrate to him that I care about how he feels about it. And that is powerful. People want to be heard and understood.
I think that's the key to mentorship right there. I mean, so often what we're observing in our mentoring relationships, and our brand of mentorship is horizontal mentorship, which means that we match people together that are open to learning from each other. So it's not a mentor to mentee relationship, it's a symbiotic, mutually beneficial relationship, which means that we could have people meeting with each other from 2 different departments, or 2 different types of companies, or 2 different scenarios in life. But what you just shed light on was the exact thing that we go for, is that more often than not, people know the answers to their own questions. They're just looking for someone to affirm them and ask questions that kind of dig deeper and listen to them, which I love.
We're looking for validation. I mean, as you become more mature and more successful at whatever your business is, it still doesn't hurt you to say, hey, Garrett, let me run something by. Here's something I had with a client, a little bit tricky, a little bit uncomfortable. Here's how I'm feeling about approaching it. What do you think? And you might just say, Gary, that's the way to go. I mean, you got it, Well, that's going to make me feel a whole lot better now that I've gotten your candid assessment. Or you may say, I think you're right on the right track, but you might want to do this one little extra additional thing that would probably put a little icing on the cake. And I may go like, brilliant. I didn't think of that. Thank you. And, if you're not open to that, if you think you know everything, then, shame on you, because none of us do. There's always a good idea that somebody else has, and certainly worth listening to, even if you're pretty sure what you're going to do even before you ask the question.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I'd love if you could share the story. Now, I've known about the story, but I don't know the full details. But one of the stories that I think really conveys your success as just an FBI hostage negotiator is the Idaho situation, where there was a guy who was part of a radical movement up in Idaho, and I think his wife and child had been shot by an FBI force, and you were able to come in and bring a mutual someone that was on the median line, that this person also respected, to get him to come out, as opposed to embanking himself in his home and shooting up people. Could you tell the story of how that all went down and how that worked, and some of the lessons?
Well, I have a couple stories like that, but that one, I have to burst your bubble. You saw from the TV show.
Yes.
That wasn't me in real life. I was out of the country during the Ruby Ridge situation in Idaho. My partner was there. The things that happened there happened, but they weren't with me. The reason they put me there was because Michael Shannon, the very high-priced actor, was playing me in the TV show, and they needed to get him in the first episode. So they Hollywooded that more than a bit. But no, the premise is good, and that's exactly what they did. If you are untrusted by someone, there is a history of negative interaction, there is absolutely nothing wrong with bringing in an intermediary that person trusts. We all do it in life all the time. Hey, sis, would you talk to dad for me? He's acting like a horse's ass at Thanksgiving. And, would you tell him to cool the politics at the table this year? Because if I bring it up, he'll get in a big argument with it, but he'll listen to you. I mean, we all use intermediaries in a lot of different ways in life. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as, you're confident that the intermediary is furthering the goals that you have. And it makes it easier sometimes to go to someone that both sides trust instead of trying to create a brand new relationship. I always think about the Camp David Accords between Begin and Sadat, and Jimmy Carter brings them up to Camp David, and they're arguing. They both want to pack their bags and leave, and Carter tells the Secret Service, don't pack their bags, don't let them leave. He just keeps them there and keeps them there and keeps them there. Next thing you know, they come up with this, very important peace deal in the Middle East. And it's just through perseverance. But he was the trusted agent. I mean, both of them, they distrusted each other, but they had a certain level of confidence in the United States and Jimmy Carter in order to bring them together. So, I think use of intermediaries has an appropriate time to be used. We've done it in the Freeman situation. I've done it in prison riots. A lot of times it's just a guarantor for a surrender. In my book, I talk about the Amtrak Siege, which was 72 hours, and back in the mid-'80s or the early '80s when that happened, it was the longest siege outside of a prison in the history of the United States at the time. Well, we're trying to get this drug guy to surrender, and one child's died. He's got another child in the train compartment, and he's already killed his sister in there. And he'll come out, but he wants to surrender to an attorney that had represented him. So we flew this attorney down from New York, and all he had to do was essentially, after this long process of getting to this point, the attorney basically had to say, hey, Mario, I'm here. They're not going to hurt you when you come out. I'm your witness that you're going to be treated well. And he surrendered. So I think I only say that in a lot of negotiations, you have to be flexible. And, you can't say, well, we don't do it that way. If a guy says to me in the house, we want him to surrender, he says, I'm not going to come out front. I don't want to get embarrassed by my neighbors. Can I come out the back door? I'm going to find a way to let him come out the back door. I'm going to try to be as accommodating as I can without compromising safety. And in the business world, what accommodations can we be made to enhance this relationship, to make sure that this client is comfortable working with us and appreciates the fact that I'm flexible and I'm a problem solver. It's funny. We once did a study of hostage negotiators and what was the attributes that made them most successful. And you'll kind of laugh. We had a hard time finding what type personality was the most successful negotiator, but there was one thing they all had in common. They were rule breakers. Isn't that interesting? To this day, it amazes me that there are people who are willing to think and move outside the box to solve a problem. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense if you think about it.
I mean, it makes a ton of sense. I would imagine that was a very unpopular way of thinking in the FBI, which I've never worked in the FBI, so I would never know, but I would imagine that it's a very much a group predicated on following rules. Like, these are the rules that are set in place. You step in line or you get kicked out.
Yeah. And that's true in all of law enforcement. And also there's there's a law enforcement personality. I mean, we teach communication skills, and we teach officers and special agents to, try to get compliance and cooperation. That's what our goal is from citizens or people we're arresting, whatever it might be. We don't want to purposely fight and, get somebody on the ground rolling around. But we also get upset when people don't do what we tell them, because we've been vested with authority and the power to exercise that authority. And when I tell somebody, okay, sir, I'm going to have to take you in, and they say, oh, no, you don't, then all of a sudden we go from nice chit chat to physical confrontation. Sometimes we move in that direction maybe sooner than we should. So, that's obviously a topic of great discussion currently. So how do we teach police officers to not only say the right things, but to convey it through your body language, through your tone, your voice, hey, this is a bad situation, but let's work together here. We don't need to make this tough on you or tough on us. And, I think you typically get from people what you give. If you treat them respectfully and with dignity, you're typically going to get that in response. Not 100% of the time. I mean, there's bad people out there. Don't get me wrong. That just no matter what you do well, there's just not going to be a good day. But for the most part, you can get people to do things.
There's something interesting about what you said and the way you said it, and that's something that I thought was really fascinating. You would almost, it reminds me of a technique I learned through like Sandler sales training, which is the technique called double reverse negatives, which is this idea of saying something like, well, I don't suppose, or, I don't know if you would be open to something XYZ type of thing. It's kind of like a combination of like Dale Carnegie and like the Sandler sales training method. But I think there's a lot of value in that, because as opposed to forcibly going in and saying, you need to do this, or this is how we're doing it, or would you be like, do this, I don't suppose, it's almost like you, by being almost slightly negative on your own idea or the compromise that you're proposing to this other person in business, you are actually much more likely to get them to agree and feel empathy and sympathy towards your side, because you're not coming at them hard charging. Is there any truth to that?
No, absolutely. And the way we would do it in my former life, we would say, well, Garrett, how do you see us resolving this? And then whatever you throw out in response, I'm looking for parts of that I can live with. Well, earlier you said, you didn't want to hurt anybody. And I took you at your word. You said it, so I know you meant it, that you didn't want to hurt it. So I'm locking you in on statements you've made. And if you talk about the way you want to come out and say, I talked to my boss, I've set it up, we can do it the way you want it done, you're really sort of obligated to follow through on us doing exactly what it is you said earlier you wanted us to do. So there's a lot of things like that. Some people look at them as trickery. I just think it's good communication. And a lot of times when people are angry or upset, even in a business deal, they don't always fully listen to what they're saying or how they're saying it. And when we repeat it back and we, spend some time talking about it, it allows them to see for the first time maybe how it comes across to us and what the impact of it is.
And I think that, oh yeah, go ahead.
Let me say one more. There's something else you said there in your comment to me, how I said something. We used to have a habit of interviewing people that surrendered, and we'd say, what was it that we said? What made you come out? Because obviously we want to learn, we want to replicate that. They always said the same thing. Always said the same thing. I don't remember what you said, but I like the way you said it. Now think about that. We tend sometimes to focus too much on the words that come out of our mouths, but it's our overall demeanor, it's our tone, it's our projection of genuineness. You don't want to be like the proverbial used car salesman. Hey, Garrett, welcome to the showroom. I know what you need. I mean, that's all phony and fake, and most people see through that. But, if you're sincere and genuine and, it attracts people, well, you came in today to buy a car. Well, have you thought about what you would like to look at? Well, listen, there's a bunch over there. Why don't you and your family go over there and look at those? I'll be over here at my desk. I don't want to bother you. If you have questions, just call me. I'll come right over and I'll help you out. That's the guy I'm going to when I buy my car. I don't want the guy that's following 6 steps behind me and constantly asking me, hey, how old are your kids? They play soccer? You're not there for that. So how we project our genuineness is a really powerful thing. Even to some extent more than what we say. Now, we can influence things by open-ended questions, paraphrasing, summarizing, doing all the good active listening skills. And they're called active because they're not passive. I mean, we are demonstrating to somebody that we understand what the issue is and how they feel about it by repeating it in our own words. Powerful stuff. But the way we do it also has an impact.
How can we be more intentional about that? How can we be, what are there things that we can do to practice presenting the information that we like to present in a way that's more likely to be well received? Is there a way that we could practice that? Because I think I'll talk to a lot of people and they'll say the words that you're supposed to say, and you hear and you're like, but I just don't buy it. I'm not buying what you're saying. Like, all the words you're saying, like, if you were to provide me a transcript of what you just said, I would say, like, check mark, you did great. But like, the way you're saying it isn't really clicking with me. I'm not fully buying that this is what you believe. How can we be more intentional about focusing on how we're saying the words we want to say, the way we want to say it?
I think you have to practice and you have to concentrate. It's also, it's a bit of a bell curve. I mean, there's probably a quarter of the people that, frankly, are just not going to be very good at this because they just don't have the patience, the communication understanding. They're just going to be a bull in the china shop and probably have relatively minimal success in whatever they do. There is probably a quarter of the people on the other end of the spectrum who are naturally intuitive and empathic and who you like immediately. You go to a social function with your significant other and you're stuck in the kitchen like we often do getting a cocktail, and you meet some new person and you end up talking with them for a half hour, and you come out and you say later, I met the most interesting person in there. We should go out to dinner with them or see them again, or like whatever. I mean, that's really good stuff. And that 50% in the middle, most of us with some effort and practice and focus can become much better at projecting that sincerity and genuineness. And part of it's slowing down and just keeping in mind, I'll have plenty of time to say what I want to say. I need first to go through this process of demonstrating to the person, I'm not coming in here and telling you what your company needs. I'm coming in here to ask you what you think you need and then see if I can come up with a potential remedy through the products we sell, the services we provide, whatever it might be. And you got to be honest enough to say, it sounds like you got this pretty squared away and I'm not sure that I can add a lot to it today, but I sure would like you to consider us if you're going to do some of these other things that I think maybe we can have a bigger role for you. That's okay. That's not a loss. That person's probably going to remember you. And when they go through that subsequent expansion or, adding on of a new product line or whatever, they're going to say, I'm going to call Garrett up. I kind of like the way, he just didn't come in here to try to sell us stuff. He really wanted to know what we were doing, what we were about. I like that.
I think that's really valuable. And I think that's really valuable in a mentoring relationship, especially a professional mentoring relationship, because so often we're learning a lot of the vulnerabilities of somebody else, and how we receive that information. Both, are we actually listening, and two, what are we saying and how are we saying it back to them? If it's said in the right way, you can build a bond that lasts for a lifetime, and it's said in the wrong way, it could isolate somebody. It can make someone feel not as comfortable with what you're saying. And so I think there's a ton of value there in successful mentoring relationships and a lot of what you've learned through FBI hostage negotiation. So, Gary, I wanted to ask you a couple more questions. The
Sure.
first one is, how have mentors helped you get to where you're at in your career?
I didn't hear the first part of that.
How did mentors help you get to where you're at in your career? How did mentors help you get to your, stature, your area, your level of expertise?
Well, I'm sure, like most humans, I have any number of flaws, but one area I'll brag on myself, I'm really good at picking my own mentors. I think whether it was in high school or college or, subsequently in my FBI career, I think I was pretty good at picking out people who were successful at what they did and seeking them out for guidance and using them as a template to try to follow. Let me give you one example. When my first office as an FBI agent, I was on a fugitive squad, and all we did was go out and arrest people every day. And there were two older, mature agents who I worked with. And one of them was just god awful at talking to people. He would piss people off. We were getting fights, and I only owned about 2 suits then, and I was getting them all torn up. We were rolling around the dirt fighting bad guys. And I said, there's got to be a better way. And the other guy I worked with was a bigger, tougher, more physical guy, but he never had to use it. He knew how to talk to people and get their cooperation. And I early on said, that's the mentor for me, not the other guy. He doesn't know how to talk to people. I want to be like this guy. I want to be like Jimmy, who taught me how to talk to a guy at the hay store or a college president, and anything in between. And, so I think that served me very, very well. And, I had other mentors in my career along the way so I think choosing a good mentor is one of the most important decisions you make. And, you also find, and I found it, when you get to be at the mentor point in your established career life, you tend to take that very seriously. You say, I'm fortunate enough others, and here's some successes I've had. I sort of have an obligation to the organization, to humanity, whatever, to pass on some of this wisdom and guidance. We do it as fathers. You do it, in the workplace, certainly. And my wife laughs at me. I mean, I have done interviews like this with high school students working on a term paper. She said, "What are you doing? You're spending a half hour on the phone or with a high school student that you've never heard of?" I said, "Well, they reached out, and if I can help them, I'll help them. If I can inspire them and, give them some ideas to be a better person, then it's just a small investment of my time." And I think people should do that, particularly when you have the time like I do now.
That's awesome. Gary, this has been an incredible lunch and learn. I've learned so much from you during this conversation. This has been great. Last question I have is, how can our audience learn more about you, connect with anything that you're working on, learn more about your book, or anything like that?
The best way is probably through my website, www.GaryNoesner, all strung together.com. And that's got interviews and, papers I've written and links to videos and presentations I've done, so forth and so on. And there's links to be able to purchase the book there. But, you can go and get the book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. And it's when they were filming the Waco TV series, up to that point, my book came out in 2010. It was hardback and an audio book. And when the TV show came out, they put it on Audible book and paperback. And I actually read the Audible book, so that was kind of fun. So yeah, it's out there and available. And I don't just talk about the lessons I've learned in my life in negotiations and how to resolve conflict, and hopefully people will like it. I think it has a much broader appeal than it wasn't intended to be a law enforcement book. So thanks for pitching it for me.
Of course. Gary, I'm really grateful for your time. I'm really grateful for your wisdom and insight. Thanks for being here. Everybody else that's watching this, thanks for being here for this Lunch and Learn. Have a wonderful rest of your day. See you, everybody.
All the best.